Okay, so we're back and answering more asks. Here we go. So I was searching Google for TWD and spin-off timelines and found little to nothing. Some of those were up till season 9-ish. Anyway, most of those said that when they get to Alexandria in season 5, we're barely 2 years or even less into the apocalypse. I was like, that sounds too little to me. Am I wrong? Also, since I couldn't find anything, I was quite surprised. Do you know or know where to find the timelines of the OG show and the spin-offs? Okay. So, yeah, actually, I think it is correct that when they reach Alexandria, it's only been 2 years. You got to understand that the first few seasons of the show were moving very, very slowly. So, first season was only a few days. You know, Rick finds Lori and Carl, and then like a day or two later, they decide to go back to the CDC. So it's like maybe a week, the first season. The second season, pretty quickly after that, they find Herschel's farm, again within a few days. And the entirety of season 2 is like a few weeks, 2 weeks, something like that. It feels like longer. It always feels like longer, not only because we're watching it week to week, and so it's longer for us to watch the show, but then we also always had that big gap in between the A part of the season and the B part of the season. So it just feels like it's been really long, but in terms of the show, it hasn't been. Now, the first big time jump we got was between season 2 and 3, because they said they had been on the road all winter. And then they find the prison. Again, season 3 is not that long. They go to war with the governor. I think we have a couple of small time jumps there, but they're probably only like a month here, a month there. And then the next big time jump we get is, again, another seasonal time jump. And this was mostly because back then with the show, they didn't have as much money. AMC was not as big as it is now, and they didn't want to deal with winter in the show because they didn't really have the capacity to film it. So they did another one, which was, again, it was probably 8 or 9 months. It had been not quite a year between the end of season 3 and the beginning of season 4. And what we see there is that the community of the prison had built up quite a lot because they brought a lot more people in. So yeah, then the A part of season 4 is just the virus, which only takes a few days. Then the governor returns, and the governor had been gone for them throughout the course of that time jump. So 8 or 9 months, they didn't think he would be back. But then he comes back. And then the prison falls in 408. And then we get the B part of the season. And we do know that that lasted at least several weeks because, especially with Beth and Daryl, we see the weather change. They go from wearing warm weather clothes and they're, in short sleeves, and Daryl's without sleeves and they're really sweaty and it's really hot, to wearing the cardigan, and Daryl has a jean jacket, so it's obviously turned cold. And they did confirm that they were, everybody was split up in their little groups and on the road for several weeks. Like it might have even been 6 or 8 weeks. But even if you put all of that together, yeah, it's only like 2 years around there by the time Grady happens. So again, when we get to season 5, they've all found each other at Terminus. They get out, they go to Father Gabriel's church, and then they go to Atlanta to get Beth, and everything happens. I mean, she's only at Grady for like a week, maybe more, maybe a week and a half or 2 weeks, but it's not very long. And again, it feels like a lot because of all the wait, because of watching it week to week. And then, back then they were doing different episodes to follow different storylines. So we would have one episode that was only about what was going on at the church, and we didn't see Daryl or Carol or Beth. And then we would have one that was just about Daryl or Carol, consumed, and we didn't see what was going on at the church. And then we would have just one about Beth, Slabtown, and we didn't see anybody else. And so it was like that. So again, it just felt like a long time that it was taking for all the storylines when really they were all happening concurrently. So by the time that they get to Alexandria, yeah, it's probably only about 2 years into the apocalypse. That is actually true. After that, we get more time jumps. And it's interesting that you say after season 9, it's hard to find. And that is when they started to be very, very vague about the storylines. And the reason is that Rick leaves in season 9 and they do the 6-year time jump. And they, at this point, I don't know if they knew how the spinoffs exactly were going to play out. So because they weren't sure, they were being vague on the timeline. And only now, recently, with The Ones Who Live, have we gotten a very concrete timeline. I told you that I told you last week that they were sticking with the 6 years, and actually they did come out because we did see a little bit of a jump that I didn't take into account. So at the beginning of both Rick and Michonne's stories, where they started seeing Rick trying to escape and then seeing Michonne first meet the caravan in this episode, that was the 6-year mark. But then we did see Michonne staying with Nat for a while. It didn't tell us how long it was, but we saw snow. So it was probably, it might have been a year that they were there recovering from that chlorine gas. And we do see that Rick was with the CRM for a while. So they did come out and confirm that the present day storyline of Rick and Michonne in The Ones Who Live, it's been 8 years since Rick left, since the bridge blew up. So we're at 8 years post 905, if that helps. And that actually makes sense because I think Daryl's storyline is a little bit beyond that. I think he's beyond it. I think Rick and Michonne might be in the CRM for another year or two trying to get out. And we've kind of come to believe that when Daryl and Beth come back together, it will be 10 years post Coda. So it's right in there. I know it's a little bit confusing, but it's because they've had so many different storylines going on that it is hard to keep track of them. And I believe that they've been vague on purpose because they didn't know exactly how it was going to play out. They knew what they were going to do. They know where they're headed with it, but timeline wise, it was just going to depend on how they could get the spinoffs made. And, then COVID came in, which probably screwed up everyone's timeline on lots of different levels and all of that. So, I hope that helps. I don't know if that answers your question, but I hope that helps. All right. Next one. I know you say that people are against Bethyl as a ship because they want other couples to happen and use the age thing as an excuse, but I'm actually 100% sure that a lot of people do think that. How do I know? Just look at our society/socials. There's a basketball player that I think is 21-ish, and he was dating a girl that is like 16. People went absolutely nuts, and it's not even a huge age difference or anything. LOL. This is obviously just one of the far too many examples nowadays. In conclusion, quite a whole lot of people find the age thing weird. Is it normal that they find it weird? Absolutely not, but they still do. And I know people shouldn't be bitching and whining since in the show laws or even morals of a regular society absolutely do not apply, but they're brain dead. So I'm just hoping the producers won't let these dumbass people discourage them from making Bethyl a thing when she comes back. No, well, okay. So I'm going to point out a few things here. You are right that there's always going to be people who complain and it doesn't make any sense, especially on social media. People use social media as a shield so that they can anonymously be negative and complain and criticize and cause trouble. Okay. So yeah, of course, there's always going to be that. But even in the example you gave, to have a 21-year-old dating a 16-year-old is actually illegal by our society's laws because she is still a minor. And I get that there are some times when you might have a 19-year-old dating a 17-year-old and he just became an adult legally before she did. I get that there are instances of that, but if people do know the laws, okay, they understand what the law is, and if they don't want to get in trouble and violate that law, there's actually not even a problem with them dating. It's if they're having sex that's the problem, and it becomes statutory rape. So I get that, again, if you have someone who's 2 years apart and he becomes an adult before she does, that's really going to suck for them, and it's just an unfortunate situation. But if you really don't want to get into trouble and you really don't want to violate the law, then it's just best to wait till she turns 18 and then you don't have a problem, So I think the reason people would go nuts here is because I'm assuming that they're seeing it as a statutory rape thing, and that is kind of a problem. I'm not going to say that's not a problem. It's a problem legally, but in our society, you also have to understand that we have a number, which is 18. And yes, to some extent, the number will always be arbitrary. It's when people are considered old enough to make their own decisions and become an adult. And some people who are over 18 are never going to be very mature. And some people who are 12 are more mature than most 21-year-olds, so it's arbitrary in that way. But what it really comes down to is the legal law and then also how mature someone is. And unfortunately, in our society, most teenagers are not mature enough to make their own decisions in that sense. I'm not talking about all of them by any means. Like I said, it's a blanket law, and so of course there are going to be exceptions. But I would have a problem if I had a 16-year-old and a 21-year-old was dating her, especially if they have a sexual relationship. Okay, I would have a big problem with that. But as you said, it's very different in TWD world, and I'm not just saying that to make an excuse for it. It's because in a society like this, it's much like the Old West. It was very common in the Middle Ages, in the Old West, in previous eras for women to get married and start having babies as soon as they turned 13. And I'm sure in some cases they were mature enough for that, and in some cases they weren't. It was really about survival, though, and it was about people were not living very long, so you had to have babies while you could. There was just a lot of differences. And in a lot of ways, the Walking Dead world it's sort of regressed to that sort of society. Children are going to grow up very, very quickly. They are going to mature very, very quickly because they have to, because of the things that they see. So it's just, when it comes to the maturity level and the psychological aspect of it, a 16-year-old in our society is going to be very, very different than a 16-year-old in TWD society. So I still think I think you can't make a blanket argument about it. And even everything I've said, there are some people that are going to say I'm splitting hairs and I'm being, I've got a double standard. And I really don't think I do. There is a difference psychologically, and I don't think that that can be pushed aside. But I do understand in this case why people would be upset about a 21-year-old dating a 16-year-old. And I do think that it would be a completely different situation in TWD world. Now, all of that said, it still does not apply to Beth and Daryl. I mean, we can have this argument and go around in circles forever. But Beth was 18, so the statutory thing does not apply to them, first of all. Even if they had gone canon, it would not apply. Okay, number two, I don't think I need to go into the psychological aspects of it. She was very mature. There's an argument that she was more mature than Daryl in that situation because he was still not as mature as a character, and especially in the romance department as we see him in subsequent seasons, whereas she had had several boyfriends. So she was actually in a lot of ways more experienced than he was. And that's not to say that she was sleeping with her boyfriends. I mean, most people are pretty sure she was still a virgin in season 4, although they didn't tell us that for sure one way or the other. But the point is she was more emotionally and romantically mature than he was. But again, the statutory thing doesn't apply because she was 18. And the other thing you have to understand is that there are always going to be some people who think the age gap is weird, and there's always going to be some people who don't. But from a legal and also psychological standpoint, once somebody turns 18, it just doesn't apply anymore. Okay, so it's a lot less weird to have a 20-year-old dating a 30-year-old than it is to have a 10-year-old dating a 20-year-old. You see what I mean? And again, it's because of the maturity level. Once everybody is an adult, they can do what they want. They can make their own decisions. So I don't really care all that much if people think an age gap between a 45-year-old and a 55-year-old is weird. I mean, they're welcome to think that. That's their opinion. But that doesn't mean it actually is taboo. Okay? As long as both parties are consenting and there is no mental deficiencies. I mean, it would be wrong if you had someone who was mentally slow and had the mind of a 12-year-old, because that would be like actually dating a 12-year-old. Okay? So, but assuming that there isn't anyone taking advantage of the other person and everyone is consenting and is of sound mind to consent and all of that, there's not a problem legally, morally, or in any other way with an age gap between adults. So, yeah, I've rambled on about this a lot. My point is, it just doesn't apply. It just isn't even a thing. So people will complain about it and rail about it, but it was a very, very convenient excuse for people who did not want Beth and Daryl to get together because they wanted Daryl with somebody else. So I hear you that there will always be people who don't like it, but also keep in mind that the people who scream the loudest are generally in the minority. And that's why they scream the loudest, because they want what they want and they know they're in the minority. So they will scream louder to make it seem like they have more people who are on their side when really they don't. And we have proven that many different times when it comes to Beth and Daryl. Probably a year or two ago, I showed a Pinterest post that I have that was about Beth and Daryl. And there were 20 or 30 comments on it, and a lot of them were anti-Bethyl. Not necessarily nasty, like 1 or 2 of them were nasty, but most of them were just going, nah, I don't think they should be together. I want Daryl and Carol, or I want Daryl and Connie. And so they were just anti-Bethyl, even if they were being pretty cool about it. But what I compared that to is that even though there were 30 comments and most of them were anti-Bethyl, it had like 12,000 likes on it. And all that shows, if they're liking the post, then that inherently shows that they agree with it. So once again, the people who didn't agree were the loudest because they were the ones who commented where others didn't. But they were also vastly in the minority. When I did the math, like 98% of people were okay with it being a Bethyl edit, and it was literally less than 2% that weren't. So keep that in mind. I think the same thing is probably true of the age gap problem. 2% of people think it's weird and will be really loud and will be really angry, where everyone else will go, you know what, as long as they're consenting adults, whatever, it's their life, let them do what they want. People just don't care. But I understand why it seems that way, because the ones who are in the minority and just want their way do tend to rail the loudest. So anyway, I really didn't mean to go all the way down that rabbit hole, and that's a really long rant, but there it is. I hope that answers your question. And it is a good question, because it's any question you have, if you're thinking it or you're wondering it, other people are too. So it is a good thing to discuss. Okay, we'll just do one more here. In season 11, Daryl talks to a soldier of the Commonwealth and says he also had to enlist in the military to help his family. Does that mean he was in the military? If that's true, why did he say to Beth he was nothing? And in season 4, when Beth tells him, I've never been in jail, has he actually been in jail, or was he just offended she thought that about him? Okay, so when he says he was in the military, I'm pretty sure he means at the Commonwealth. So you know how he became one of the Commonwealth soldiers and wore the stormtrooper white gear? I'm pretty sure that's what he means when he's talking to the trooper. He enlisted in the Commonwealth's military in order to help his family, in order to bring the Alexandrians into the network with the Commonwealth. So he didn't mean like before. No way he was in the military before the series started, because he told Beth that he was nothing and he just wandered around with Merle. He was never doing anything as productive as being a member of the military. Okay, so he just meant the Commonwealth. I don't think he ever has been in jail. So it's true. He told her that he never had been. And he was offended that she thought that of him. And I don't even know if offended is quite the right word. He was hurt that she thought that of him. That, it's interesting that he cared what her opinion of him was. So, no, I don't think he's ever been in jail, and he was never in the military before the Commonwealth. So hopefully that answers your question. Let me know if you need more clarification. All right, I'm going to stop there for today, but I will be back tomorrow.